The sound of tiny feet running across marble floors echoed through the Miami mansion as 5-year-old Lily burst into tears. "Mama Bella," she cried out, her small arms reaching desperately for the young Italian woman who had just entered the grand foyer. Victoria Castellano's perfectly manicured hand shot out like a blade, grabbing the child's wrist with cold precision. "She is not your mother." Her voice cut through the air like ice, her steel blue eyes blazing with fury as she stared down at the trembling little girl. "Stop this ridiculous behavior immediately." But Lily only cried harder, struggling against Victoria's grip while reaching toward Isabella, the 27-year-old nanny, whose gentle presence had become her entire world. From the top of the grand staircase, Vincent Romano watched the scene unfold in silence, his jaw clenched tight beneath his perfectly groomed stubble, the faded scar running from his temple to his left cheekbone, seeming to darken with his mood. The most powerful mafia boss in Miami had built an empire on control, on calculated decisions that served his family's interests. His engagement to Victoria was supposed to unite two of the city's most influential Italian families, securing peace and prosperity for generations. But as he watched his daughter's desperate tears and saw the pain flash across Isabella's warm brown eyes, Vincent felt something crack inside his chest, something he had kept locked away since the night his wife was murdered 3 years ago. The little girl's sobs filled the mansion, and for the first time in years, the most feared man in Miami felt completely powerless. Welcome to New Story Today. If this story already has your heart racing, smash that like button and subscribe to join our family. Share this with someone who loves intense romance. Now let us begin this incredible journey together. 8 months earlier, the Miami sun poured down with a scorching intensity as Isabella Martinez stepped out of the international airport carrying a battered suitcase with frayed corners and a heart filled with fragile hope. A 27-year-old woman from a small village outside Naples, who had spent her entire youth fighting against fate, and who now stood on unfamiliar ground with less than $200 in her pocket and a single dream of saving her younger brother, her father having died when Isabella was only 8 years old after a workplace accident at a construction site, stole away the family's pillar in a single cruel moment, leaving behind a frail mother forced to labor relentlessly in a garment factory from dawn until deep into the night. Isabella still remembering her mother's calloused hands, fingers pierced by needles until they bled, and eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet still managing a smile whenever she looked at her 2 children. Her mother having fought like a soldier, but ultimately spared no mercy by lung cancer, and Isabella was made to watch the strongest woman in her life waste away, day by day, until she drew her final breath on a cold, rainy night when Isabella was 19. From that moment on, Isabella carried everything alone, taking any work she could find, from waiting tables to cleaning hotel rooms to caring for the elderly by the hour, all to keep her brother Marco in school, only for fate to strike again with merciless force. When Marco was involved in a motorcycle accident 2 years earlier that severely damaged his spine and left his legs unable to move, the doctors saying he needed surgery abroad at a cost reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars, a number Isabella could not dare to imagine even if she worked for the rest of her life. And so when an agency in Italy introduced a nanny position in Miami with pay 10 times higher than anything she had ever earned, Isabella did not hesitate to sell everything she could and borrow from everywhere possible to afford the plane ticket and the agency fee. Yet Miami did not welcome her with the American dream she had imagined, the agency address she was given turning out to be an abandoned storefront, the contact number no longer existing, and the young woman realizing she had been swindled of every last cent. The first 3 nights in America, finding Isabella curled up on a cold park bench clutching her torn suitcase as if it were the last remnant of hope, tears streaming silently in the unfamiliar darkness, missing Marco, missing the look in his eyes when he saw her off at the airport, remembering her promise to return and take him for surgery. And in her most desperate moments, Isabella wanted to surrender to it all, yet her brother's face would rise before her, the trusting eyes of a 24-year-old man confined to his bed and waiting for a miracle from his sister. And it was that image alone that held her there, forcing her to stand up and continue searching for any chance she could find. Until on the 4th day, as Isabella sat numbly in a small cafe, with nothing but a complimentary glass of water, an older woman named Maria struck up a conversation with her. Maria, a retired servant who once worked for the Romano family, felt a surge of compassion. "I know the head housekeeper, Rosa. She is desperate for good help and trusts my judgment," Maria said, her voice hesitant as though weighing something carefully. "They pay extremely well, but it is a special family, and you must be cautious." Isabella did not understand what special meant, and at that moment she did not care, knowing only that this was her sole opportunity. The final thread holding her hope of saving Marco, and she nodded in agreement without asking a single further question, unaware that this decision made in a moment of despair would completely change her life, leading her to the opulent mansion of the Romano family, and to a man with eyes as cold as ice, yet capable of setting her heart ablaze every time he looked at her. The sleek black sedan came to a stop before an enormous wrought iron gate carved with intricate detail, and Isabella found herself holding her breath as the mansion revealed itself before her eyes, for she had once cleaned rooms in five-star hotels in Naples, and had glimpsed luxury through half-open doors, yet none of it compared to this place, the Romano estate rising in the heart of Coral Gables, like a miniature palace, with rows of pristine white marble columns supporting soaring arches, angel statues standing guard along a pathway of white gravel, and a massive fountain at the center of the courtyard, where crystal-clear water caught the sunlight and scattered it into shimmering reflections. Isabella stepping out of the car with her battered old suitcase looking painfully out of place amid such splendor, feeling like a speck of dust lost in paradise, the heavy oak doors opening to reveal an elderly woman with neatly pinned silver hair and a kindly face sharpened by watchful eyes, asking if she was Isabella. "Maria called me and vouched for you," she said in a warm voice edged with caution before introducing herself as Rosa Marino, the family's cook for more than 30 years, and gesturing for her to follow, Isabella trailing behind through a vast hall of gleaming marble floors, so polished she could see her own reflection beneath her feet, past towering walls adorned with classical oil paintings, carefully arranged vases of fresh flowers filling the air with fragrance, and a massive crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling and sparkling like thousands of diamonds. Until as they neared the kitchen corridor, Rosa stopped abruptly and turned with a grave look, lowering her voice almost to a whisper to warn her that this family was unlike ordinary ones, that there would be things she might see and things she might hear, but she must never ask questions, never be curious, and above all, never repeat anything beyond the walls of this house. Isabella swallowing hard as her heart pounded in her chest, yet nodding all the same, for she had no other choice, and Marco was waiting, and she would do anything to save her brother. Rosa studying her for a few moments as if weighing something unseen before sighing softly and patting her shoulder, telling her she was a good person and that she could see it in her eyes, and asking her to take good care of little Lily, because the child needed someone like her, Lily's room being on the second floor at the far end of the east wing, its pale pink door the only splash of color amid the mansion's muted tones. Rosa knocking gently before opening it to reveal a 5-year-old girl curled tightly in the corner, clutching a worn stuffed bear, wide brown eyes lifted in fear and guarded suspicion. Rosa introducing Isabella as the one who would care for her from now on in the gentlest voice she could manage, only for the child to shrink further and bury her face into the bear's fur, as if trying to disappear from the world. Rosa sighing and explaining in a low voice that Lily had not spoken to anyone since her mother died 3 years earlier, when the child was 2 years old, that they had tried everything, and that Isabella was the 7th nanny that year. Isabella feeling a sharp ache in her chest as she looked at the small, trembling figure and somehow saw her own past reflected there, the 8-year-old girl who had lost her father and had no idea how to go on. And so she slowly lowered herself to the floor at a safe distance and began to hum a lullaby in Italian, the same song her mother had sung each night before illness took her, her voice soft and warm and filled with longing and boundless love once given to her and now offered in return. Rosa, standing at the doorway about to speak before falling silent as she witnessed something extraordinary, Lily slowly lifting her head, round eyes fixed on Isabella with a mixture of curiosity and wonder, as if hearing a melody long forgotten, Isabella continuing to sing without stopping or rushing, letting the tune flow gently like a cool stream, until the unimaginable happened, and Lily released the stuffed bear, stood up, and walked slowly toward Isabella, as if drawn by an unseen force, stopping just before her, and lifting tear-filled brown eyes as small lips formed the first words spoken in nearly 3 years, telling her that she sang like her mother, and Isabella feeling tears spill as she wrapped her arms around the child's trembling body, while Lily did not resist or pull away, but instead clung tightly to Isabella's neck, as though afraid she might vanish, and from the doorway Rosa quietly wiped her own tears, knowing that life inside this mansion would never be the same again. The first 3 days at the Romano mansion passed like a strange dream for Isabella, as she slowly grew accustomed to the overwhelming luxury surrounding her and, more importantly, completely won the heart of little Lily, the 5-year-old child now following Isabella like a shadow, clutching her hand whenever they moved through the mansion, and insisting every night that Isabella sing the Italian lullaby before she would close her eyes and sleep. Rosa, watching Lily's miraculous transformation, with an expression that was both relieved and uneasy, many times seeming as though she wanted to say something to Isabella only to stop herself, quietly shaking her head and turning away, and Isabella sensing that there was something unsettling about this house, about the men in black suits moving through it with cold expressions, about the whispered phone calls in Italian that fell abruptly silent whenever she passed by, and especially about the study on the first floor that Rosa had warned her never to go near. Yet she did not ask, remembering Rosa's warning and knowing she had something far more important to do, which was to care for Lily properly so she could earn money to send back to Marco. Until on the third night, Isabella was awakened by strange noises drifting up from downstairs, urgent voices, heavy footsteps, and the slam of a door, and she slipped quietly out of bed, checked on Lily, and found the child still sleeping soundly, before her instinctive curiosity pulled her into the hallway, the mansion submerged in darkness, save for a faint spill of light from the grand living room, casting a pale glow across the marble floor. Isabella, knowing she should not go there, yet finding her feet moving on their own as if guided by an unseen force, stopping at the corner of the corridor where she could see into the living room without being seen, and what she witnessed made the blood in her veins turn to ice. A tall man standing in the center of the room with his back to her, his black suit torn at the shoulder, his hands smeared with fresh red blood, as another man hastily wrapped a bandage around them, the man speaking something in Italian in a voice low and cold as steel, before suddenly seeming to sense her gaze and turning his head, Isabella freezing as those deep black eyes pierced straight through the darkness and into her, and she recognized the face from the massive portrait hanging on the living room wall. The face Rosa had said belonged to Vincent Romano, the master of the house and the most powerful man within it, a faint scar running from his temple down to his left cheek, like a silent warning of violence and danger. Yet it was not the scar that made Isabella tremble, but his gaze, sharp and icy, as if it could see straight into the depths of her soul, and she knew she should run, should turn back, should pack her things, and leave immediately. But her legs refused to move, Vincent stepping toward her with slow and menacing strides, blood-stained hands hanging loosely at his sides, asking who she was, though he already knew. "Isabella Martinez," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My men ran a background check on you the moment you walked through my gates. You are clean, and that is the only reason you are still breathing inside my house." Isabella forced her fear down. Isabella forcing her fear down her dry throat, and replying that she was Isabella, Lily's new nanny, her voice trembling, yet her eyes holding his, not lowering her gaze and not stepping back. Vincent stopping less than a single step away from her, eyes narrowing as if appraising prey. Isabella catching the scent of blood mixed with expensive cologne rising from him, and he asked if she was not afraid, his voice still cold but touched with a flicker of curiosity. Isabella drawing a deep breath before answering that she was afraid but she had nowhere else to go and Lily needed her, her words seeming to surprise him as he studied her in silence for several long seconds before turning and walking past her toward the staircase. Yet just as he placed his foot on the first step, a small voice sounded from the darkness above, calling Papa. Both Isabella and Vincent turning to see Lily standing at the end of the second-floor hallway, clutching her stuffed bear, eyes still heavy with sleep as she looked down the stairs. The child having surely awakened to find Isabella gone and come searching for her, Isabella rushing up the stairs and dropping to her knees to gather Lily into her arms, whispering gently and asking why she was awake, and calling her tesoro as she promised to take her back to bed, Lily nodding before turning to look at Vincent still standing at the foot of the stairs. And then something miraculous happened. The little girl smiled. A small, fragile smile, the first Vincent had seen on his daughter's face in nearly 3 endless years. Lily softly saying that she liked Bella before burying her face against Isabella's shoulder, and Vincent standing motionless below. The deep black eyes of the most powerful Mafia lord in Miami, lighting for the first time with an emotion he had believed long dead, as he watched his daughter smile in the arms of a young stranger, wearing a simple nightdress with brown hair, falling loose around her shoulders, and in that moment Vincent Romano knew that his life would never be the same again. The weeks that followed flowed like a gentle river, and Isabella slowly found her rhythm of life within the opulent walls of the Romano family mansion, waking each morning as the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, choosing Lily's clothes, brushing the little girl's soft black curls into sweet braided styles, then taking her downstairs to breakfast with Rosa, the 5-year-old now blooming like a flower finely watered after years of drought, speaking more, laughing more, her large brown eyes no longer holding that constant shadow of fear. And every afternoon Isabella would take Lily into the garden, where they chased butterflies, watered flowers, and lay stretched out on the lush green grass, counting the clouds drifting across the clear Miami sky. Moments in which Isabella almost forgot she was living in the home of a Mafia lord. I forgot Vincent's blood-stained hands that night, and allowed herself to savor the rare peace beside the child who had become an essential part of her heart. Until 1 month after Isabella's arrival, something she never expected occurred. On an ordinary evening, as she read Lily a fairy tale before bed, her voice soft as she spoke of a princess and a prince in a distant castle. And when the story ended, Lily lifted her sleepy eyes and whispered that she loved Mama Bella. Isabella, feeling her heart constrict as tears spilled beyond control, knowing she should correct her, should tell Lily she was not her mother. Yet facing those eyes filled with trust and love, she could not bring herself to say the words, instead holding Lily close and whispering that Mama Bella loved her too, Tesoro. And from that moment Lily called her Mama Bella, as naturally as breathing, and Isabella stopped trying to change it, aware it might cause trouble, yet unable to take away the only source of happiness for a child who had lost her mother so young. Rosa, witnessing the change with eyes that held both warmth and worry, often wanting to warn Isabella yet falling silent, perhaps unwilling to shatter the joy blooming on Lily's face. Each month Isabella receiving her wages and sending nearly all of it back to Italy for Marco, keeping only a small amount to buy a few toys for Lily and the bare necessities for herself, calling her brother every week and hearing his voice grow brighter and more hopeful with each conversation. Marco telling her during one call that the doctors said his condition was stable and that if they could afford surgery within another year, his chances of recovery were very high. His voice trembling with emotion, Isabella weeping quietly that night. But those were tears of happiness. Because she was doing it. She was slowly moving closer to saving her brother. Life in the Romano mansion not being perfect, with frightening men still coming and going, mysterious conversations still ending abruptly when she appeared, and Vincent's deep black eyes occasionally watching her from afar with a gaze she could not decipher. Yet Isabella learned not to ask, not to be curious, and to focus on what mattered most, caring for Lily and earning money for Marco, unaware that those peaceful days were only the calm before the storm, and that fate had already begun weaving, invisible threads pulling her ever closer to the most dangerous man in Miami, the man her heart would soon find impossible to resist. Morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass panels of the expansive kitchen, laying a warm golden sheen across the pristine white marble. As Isabella moved quietly between the stove and the refrigerator, Rosa having taken the day off for a medical appointment and Isabella volunteering to prepare breakfast for Lily, the little girl having pleaded all week for chocolate chip pancakes like the ones Isabella used to make in Naples for Marco, and Isabella unable to refuse those wide brown eyes filled with hope, murmuring "Buongiorno piccolina," as Lily padded into the kitchen in pink pajamas with her black curls tousled from sleep, her worn stuffed bear still clutched tightly in her arms, Isabella telling her that Mama Bella was making her special pancakes, Lily squealing with delight and running to hug Isabella's legs, her eyes shining like two small stars, Isabella lifting her onto the high stool beside the counter before returning to the pan, where the sweet scent of pancakes filled the air, softly singing the familiar Italian lullaby as she poured the batter and flipped the golden cakes with practiced ease, so absorbed in cooking and song that she failed to notice someone had entered the kitchen and was now leaning against the doorframe, deep black eyes following her every movement, until Lily cried out "Papa," and Isabella startled, nearly dropping the spatula as she turned and met the piercing gaze of Vincent Romano, standing there in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that hugged his powerful frame, the white shirt open at the collar revealing a glimpse of the Romano family crest tattooed at his neck, his dark hair still damp and slightly curled as if fresh from the shower, Isabella greeting him softly as Mr. Romano, while trying to steady her voice despite her heart racing wildly, quickly turning back to the pan to avoid his gaze, yet feeling the heat of it burning into the back of her neck, the sound of expensive leather shoes echoing on stone as Vincent approached, the air in the kitchen thickening as he stopped beside her, close enough for her to catch the warm scent of sandalwood cologne mixed with clean soap, telling her to call him Vincent in a low velvety voice that brushed her ear, saying there was no need for formality, especially when she was taking such good care of his daughter. Isabella, swallowing hard and replying that she was only doing her job, correcting herself awkwardly as his name slipped from her lips like a whisper, drawing a faint smile from him, the first she had ever seen on that cold face. Vincent telling her that Lily had not called anyone Mama since her mother died, and that Isabella had achieved in weeks what 7 nannies had failed to do in nearly 3 years. Isabella feeling her cheeks burn under his scrutiny, and turning away to plate the pancakes for Lily, apologizing softly if it made him uncomfortable, and saying Lily was a special child who only needed someone to truly love her. Vincent asking quietly whether she truly loved the child, something in his voice softening, Isabella meeting his gaze without hesitation, and answering that she did, that she loved Lily as if she were her own sister, and would do anything to protect her, Vincent's eyes darkening with an emotion she could not name, as he studied her before lifting his hand and gently brushing his thumb across her cheek to wipe away a streak of pancake batter she had not known was there, Isabella freezing. Breath caught, her body rigid beneath a touch as light as a feather yet as searing as fire, Vincent murmuring that she had batter on her face while his thumb lingered before slowly retreating, the moment shattering when Lily called out that the pancake was burning, Isabella spinning back to the stove to find the last pancake scorched on one side, hastily turning off the heat with her heart still pounding, unable to look back at Vincent as he said nothing further, only stepping to Lily to kiss her forehead and take an espresso from the automatic machine, pausing at the doorway before leaving to say without turning around that she sang beautifully and that he hoped to hear it again, disappearing down the hall and leaving Isabella standing there with flushed cheeks, a racing heart, and a dangerous feeling rising in her chest that she knew she should never allow herself to feel for a man like him. From that morning in the kitchen onward, Isabella did everything she could to avoid Vincent, waking earlier to prepare Lily's breakfast before he came downstairs, taking the little girl into the garden whenever she heard the sound of his car arriving at the estate, and always finding some excuse to leave the room whenever he entered. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she could not escape the feeling that those deep black eyes were watching her from afar, and each accidental meeting of their gazes sent her heart into a frantic race, as if it might leap from her chest. Rosa seeming to sense that something was amiss, watching Isabella with worried eyes and sighing more often but saying nothing, perhaps knowing that there were things words could not stop. Until a week after that fateful morning, Lily made an unexpected request before bedtime, asking Mama Bella if Papa could read her a story that night, lifting her wide brown eyes and saying she missed Papa's dragon voice. And Isabella was startled because it was the first time Lily had Dudong asked to see her father since Isabella arrived at the mansion, and she could not bring herself to refuse, leading Lily down to Vincent's study with her heart pounding as she knocked, finding him behind a massive oak desk piled high with papers, his cold eyes lifting in irritation at the interruption, only to soften completely when he saw Lily standing behind Isabella, calling his daughter Stellina in Italian, with a voice that shifted into something unexpectedly gentle, Lily running to him and chattering excitedly about wanting to hear Papa read with the dragon voice she remembered. Isabella intending to retreat but stopping when Vincent looked up and told her to stay, not as a command, yet not quite a request either, saying Lily would need her afterward to fall asleep, and Isabella simply nodded and stood at the doorway, watching Vincent lift Lily into his lap and take a fairy tale book from the shelf, and what she witnessed over the next hour changed her view of him entirely. For Vincent Romano, the cold and ruthless Mafia lord feared throughout Miami, now sat reading to his daughter in the softest voice Isabella had ever heard, growling like a dragon to make Lily laugh, changing his tone for each character so vividly that the child clapped with delight, pausing after every page to kiss Lily's dark curls, as though they were the most precious treasure in the world, while Isabella stood silently at the door, tears sliding down her cheeks without her realizing it, seeing not the man with blood on his hands from that night, nor the powerful figure with eyes like ice, but a father who loved his daughter to the depths of his being, and a man trying to mend the shattered remains of a family broken by the loss of his wife. And when the story ended, Lily was asleep in his arms, her breathing even, and a faint smile still lingering on her lips, Vincent rising carefully with his daughter and turning to find Isabella still standing there with tear-filled eyes, saying nothing as he moved closer with Lily in his arms, the distance between them so small that Isabella could hear his heartbeat, telling her softly that she was crying, not as a question, Isabella hastily wiping her tears in embarrassment and trying to apologize without knowing how to explain herself, Vincent asking quietly what she meant, his low voice and penetrating gaze seeming to read her every thought, Isabella drawing a deep breath before answering that she had simply never seen anyone love their child so much, and that it was beautiful. Vincent falling silent for a long moment, his eyes darkening with an emotion she could not decipher, finally saying that Lily was all he had left, and that he had failed to protect her mother and would never allow that to happen again, before passing her and carrying Lily back to her room, leaving Isabella alone in the dark hallway with a heart trembling under a feeling she knew she was not allowed to have. And that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the image of Vincent reading to his daughter replayed endlessly in her mind like a film without an ending. Knowing she was stepping into dangerous territory, knowing her heart was beginning to stir for a man she could never have, a mafia lord, her employer, a man bound to marry for family duty, while she was only a poor nanny from Naples with a bedridden brother and an uncertain future. Yet the heart never obeyed reason. And that night, for the first time since arriving at the Romano estate, Isabella dreamed of Vincent Romano's deep black eyes looking at her with something far beyond curiosity. The nightmare came at midnight like a starving beast that had stalked Isabella for years, and she found herself standing in a dilapidated hospital room in Naples, the sharp scent of disinfectant burning her nostrils, while on the stark white bed her mother lay with a body so wasted it seemed reduced to bone, yellowed skin stretched tight as though she had died long ago and her body had not yet understood it, her mother reaching out weakly toward her, cracked lips trembling as if trying to speak. Yet Isabella could not move, her legs poured full of lead, able only to watch as her mother slowly slipped away in despair, Isabella screaming that she was sorry and begging her mother not to leave her, her voice swallowed by darkness. And when she finally reached the bedside, her mother's eyes were closed, her hand already cold and limp at the edge of the bed, Isabella jolting awake with a broken sob lodged in her throat, her body drenched in cold sweat, tears soaking the pillow without her knowing when they had begun, curling in on herself and clutching her knees to her chest as she struggled to silence her cries, so as not to wake Lily in the next room. Yet her body refused to obey, and the sobs escaped against her will. The grief of losing her mother, which she thought she had buried for 8 years, crashing back like a broken dam, remembering her mother's calloused hands, the tired yet loving smile each night when she returned from the garment factory, the rough lullabies sung through cold winter nights, and the final moment when her mother had gripped her hand and whispered with failing breath to take care of Marco, to live well, and that she loved her so much. A soft knock, startling Isabella into lifting her head, and before she could wipe her tears, the door opened to reveal Vincent standing there in black silk sleepwear, dark curls tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep, yet filled with concern as he took in her tear-streaked face, telling her softly that he heard her crying as he passed by, and asking if she was all right, Isabella hastily wiping her face in embarrassment and confusion, apologizing for waking him and saying it was only a nightmare. Vincent saying nothing as he stepped into the room and closed the door behind him, sitting on the edge of the bed less than an arm's length away, the sudden closeness stealing Isabella's breath, though she did not move away. Something in his deep black eyes tonight making her feel safe rather than afraid, Vincent telling her after a long silence that he knew that feeling, that nightmares never let go no matter how much time passed, his voice low and heavy as if revealing a secret kept for years, Isabella lifting her eyes to him, and for the first time seeing the fragility hidden behind the wall of ice he had built, Vincent whispering the name Sophia, his wife and Lily's mother, telling her that Sophia had been shot before his eyes 3 years earlier, in an ambush by a rival family, that he had held her as the light faded from her eyes, and could do nothing to save her. Isabella's heart aching as she almost reached out to touch him, and then stopped, telling him gently that he had done everything he could, and that it was not his fault, Vincent replying bitterly that it was his fault because he had brought her into that world, promised to protect her, and failed, that every night he still saw her face in his nightmares, and was reminded of that failure, the two of them sitting in silence as darkness wrapped the room like a soft blanket, and in that private space, Isabella finding the courage to open her heart, telling him that her mother had died of cancer, that she had worked herself to exhaustion in a garment factory to raise Isabella and Marco after their father died, that Isabella had watched her grow thinner each day, coughing blood while hiding it until it was too late, that she had failed to save her mother just as he had failed to save Sophia, and that now Marco lay bedridden in Italy waiting for surgery. The reason she was here and accepted everything because she could not break her promise to her mother again, Isabella's tears spilling freely now as she cried for her mother, for Marco, and for herself after years of fighting fate alone, and then the unexpected happening as Vincent's strong arm came around her shoulders and drew her into his chest, Isabella crying against him while hearing the steady beat of his heart, Vincent saying nothing, only holding her, one hand gently stroking her hair as though she were something precious that needed care, the two of them remaining like that for a long time, two lonely souls healing each other through silence and warmth, and when Isabella finally lifted her head, her swollen brown eyes meeting Vincent's in the dark, She saw not a cold Mafia lord but a broken man trying to piece himself back together, thanking him in a whisper. Vincent answering hoarsely and thanking her for giving Lily a mother, and for showing him that he was not alone in his pain. Then standing and leaving the room without looking back, though Isabella knew that night had changed everything, that they had seen each other's souls, touched each other's wounds, and that from this moment on, nothing could ever be the same again. 1 week after the night they shared their secrets in the dark. Everything between Isabella and Vincent had changed in ways so subtle that only the two of them could feel it, their eyes seeking each other across crowded rooms. Accidental brushes of hands lingering a second too long when passing a cup of coffee. And every evening Vincent taking time to read to Lily, while Isabella stood quietly at the doorway as part of an unspoken ritual, until the storm arrived on a Saturday afternoon, when a gleaming white Maserati came to a sharp stop before the gates of the mansion, and a woman stepped out as if she owned the world itself. Victoria Castellano. Isabella heard Rosa whisper tensely at her side, the boss's fiancée and the daughter of Don Antonio Castellano, telling her she should take Lily away immediately. But it was already too late, for Victoria swept into the grand hall in Louboutin heels, striking the marble like the beat of war drums, platinum blonde hair styled to perfection, a form-fitting red Chanel dress clinging to her slender body like living flame, steel blue eyes scanning the room with proprietary disdain. And when that gaze landed on Isabella standing beside Lily, Isabella felt as though she had been plunged into ice water, Victoria asking who she was in a voice sharp as a blade, not even looking directly at Isabella but turning to Rosa as if Isabella were an object unworthy of direct address. Rosa replying that she was Isabella, Lily's nanny, her voice carefully steady, though her hands clenched her apron, Victoria letting out a soft laugh that held no warmth, remarking with bored contempt that it was just another nanny, and asking whether the child had driven this one away yet or whether she was still clinging on for the generous salary. Isabella feeling heat rush to her face but holding herself still because Lily was gripping her hand in fear. Lily whispering that she did not like the woman, and Isabella's heart aching as she realized the child sensed the hostility radiating from Victoria, Victoria's eyes narrowing dangerously as she asked what Lily had just called Isabella, repeating the word mama in a low, threatening tone, her red lips pressing into a thin line before she pointed directly at Isabella and ordered her to take the child upstairs immediately, and then return to clean the living room for that evening's party, demanding perfection when her guests arrived. Isabella wanting to protest that she was not a maid but only Lily's nanny, yet Rosa's warning look silenced her, and she lowered her head, lifted Lily into her arms, and hurried toward the stairs, fighting back tears of humiliation, Victoria's voice following her to remind her to wear a proper uniform, because she did not want guests mistaking her for family. Isabella grinding her teeth and continuing upward, unaware that Vincent stood in the upper hallway, his dark eyes turning stormy as he witnessed everything. And after settling Lily down for her nap, Isabella sought out Rosa in the kitchen, where the older woman prepared food for the party with trembling hands, Isabella asking who Victoria was and why she treated everyone that way. Rosa sighing heavily and explaining that Victoria Castellano was the only daughter of Don Antonio Castellano, that the Castellano family was the second most powerful mafia family in Miami after the Romano family, and that the marriage between Victoria and Vincent had been arranged years earlier to unite the families and secure peace and power for both sides. Isabella blurting out that Vincent did not love her before she could stop herself, Rosa fixing her with a sharp knowing look and telling her slowly that love did not matter in this world, only power and duty, that Vincent understood this, and Isabella must too, that she was only a nanny, and Victoria would be the mistress of the house, warning her not to let her heart lead her, because that road led only to suffering. Isabella wanting to argue, yet knowing Rosa was right, knowing she was just a poor girl from Naples with a bedridden brother and nothing but her bare hands. While Victoria Castellano was a princess of an empire and the destined fiancée of Vincent Romano, and no matter how her heart raced when she saw him, or how his deep black eyes sometimes looked at her as if she were something rare, reality did not change. She did not belong to this world, and she could never belong to that man. That evening's party unfolded in the grand living room of the Romano mansion, where expensive suits and glittering evening gowns blended with polished laughter and the scent of vintage wine, and although Isabella had tried to stay far away as Rosa advised, Victoria sent a servant to her room with a command that she must come down to serve because they were short-staffed. Isabella knowing it was a trap and knowing Victoria meant to humiliate her, yet having no choice but to put on the simple black uniform Rosa gave her, and descend the staircase with a heavy heart, the room filled with roughly 30 elegant guests, powerful faces from Miami's elite and allied mafia families. Isabella, immediately noticing Vincent's absence and not knowing whether that eased her or made her more afraid. Victoria standing at the center of the room like a queen among her court, her gold evening gown shimmering beneath the crystal chandelier, a diamond necklace as large as grapes blazing at her throat. And when she saw Isabella enter carrying a tray of drinks, Victoria's red lips curled into a cruel smile, loudly drawing attention and announcing for all to hear that their little nanny had finally decided to show herself, every gaze in the room turning toward Isabella as she lowered her head and tried to move toward the service table, hoping to be ignored, only for Victoria to step directly into her path, steel blue eyes raking over her with open contempt, as she introduced Isabella Martinez to the room, the Italian nanny from some poor village near Naples with no family and no status who was allegedly trying to seduce her fiancé with cheap tricks. Isabella, feeling blood rush to her face, wanting to protest yet finding her throat locked tight. Victoria continuing with a razor-sharp voice that Isabella had even coaxed little Lily into calling her mother, sneering that it was pitiful for a lowly servant to dream of entering high society by exploiting a motherless child, mocking laughter and whispers rippling through the room as Isabella felt herself drowning in contempt, searching desperately for a kind face and finding only curiosity, ridicule, and indifference. Rosa standing helplessly at the kitchen entrance with tear-reddened eyes, powerless like Isabella herself, Victoria stepping closer and lowering her voice just enough to wound, asking whether Isabella had slept with him yet, or whether she was waiting until she was sure she would gain something before spreading her legs, the words striking Isabella like a physical blow as tears spilled uncontrollably, and the tray in her hands began to shake, the filthy accusations piercing her heart like countless needles. Though she had never once thought of seducing Vincent for money, Isabella unable to speak or defend herself, knowing any word would be twisted against her, Victoria laughing with cruel delight, and announcing to the guests that these climbers always wore masks of innocence, while calculating every step, boasting that she had seen through Isabella's scheme in time, and Isabella could endure no more, setting the tray down and fleeing the room as laughter and gossip chased her like demons, running up the stairs and through the corridors into her room where she locked the door and collapsed to the floor, clutching her knees and sobbing for the humiliation, for her helplessness, and for the knowledge that she had no power to resist in this world, that she was only a poor nanny and Victoria Castellano could do whatever she wished to her without consequence. While elsewhere in the city, Vincent Romano sat in a tense meeting with his allies, unaware that the woman who had touched his frozen heart was being crushed into pieces by the very fiancé bound to him by duty. Vincent returned to the mansion when the party was nearly over, the last guests departing with polite handshakes and practiced smiles, and he crossed the grand hall with the weariness of a long meeting heavy on his shoulders, only to stop short when Rosa appeared before him with reddened eyes and a face drawn with worry, calling him softly and telling him that something had happened that evening involving Isabella, a chill running down Vincent's spine at the sound of her name as he gripped Rosa's shoulders and demanded to know what was wrong with a tension sharper than when facing an enemy. Rosa recounting everything from Victoria, forcing Isabella to serve at the party, to the public humiliation, and the cruel words branding her as a poor servant trying to seduce her fiancé with cheap tricks, each sentence striking Vincent like a blade to the chest as his hands clenched until his knuckles went white, cutting Rosa off to ask where Isabella was in a voice low and dangerous like a beast's growl. Rosa answering that Isabella was in her room, locked inside since evening, and refusing to open the door for anyone, Vincent saying nothing more as he turned and strode toward the stairs, leaving Victoria behind in the living room with her victorious smile and the lingering guests, not sparing her a glance, driven by a single thought to reach Isabella at once, and when he stood before her door, he heard the muffled sound of her sobs from within and felt his heart constrict, knocking gently and calling her name with a softness that surprised even him, asking her to open the door, the crying stopping but the door remaining closed as Isabella's hoarse voice told him he did not need to be there and should return to his fiancé. Vincent's anger flaring not at her but at himself for failing to protect her, pleading again for her to open the door. The silence stretching before the lock finally clicked, and the door opened to reveal a sight that shattered him. Isabella with swollen eyes and a face flushed from tears, brown curls falling in disarray, her black uniform rumpled as if she had been curled on the floor for hours, looking like a small bird beaten by a storm, and awakening in him the urge to burn the world. Vincent stepping inside and closing the door behind him, his dark eyes never leaving her, as he apologized in a voice rough with restrained emotion, telling her he should have been there and should have protected her, Isabella shaking her head as tears spilled again, and whispering that it was not his fault, and that Victoria was right, that she was only a poor servant who did not belong there. Her words breaking off as Vincent moved forward and lifted her face with his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze as he told her no one had the right to speak to her that way, his voice trembling with fury and something far stronger, telling her she was not what Victoria said, that she was the most extraordinary woman he had ever met, that she had saved his daughter and brought warmth back into this house for the first time in 3 years. Isabella, seeing in his burning eyes not a cold mafia lord but a man losing control because of her, whispering that he should not say these things because he was about to be married and bound by duty. Vincent answering that he knew and that he should not and that it was madness, yet he could not stop anymore as his thumb brushed away her tears, and then there were no more words, as he bent and pressed his lips to hers, their first kiss, not gentle like a fairy tale, but fierce and desperate, carrying weeks of restrained longing, Isabella's knees weakening as his mouth moved against hers, and his strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her into his solid chest, knowing it was wrong, and that they were crossing a line with no return, yet unable and unwilling to stop, for in that moment Isabella Martinez felt for the first time in her life, truly desired, cherished, and seen, and she would have burned the world to hold on to that single heartbeat of forbidden love. From that night on, the world of Isabella and Vincent changed completely, even though, on the surface, everything maintained the same false appearance of normalcy, because during the day they kept their distance, Isabella remaining the devoted nanny caring for Lily, while Vincent continued to be the powerful master of the house with an ice-cold expression before others. Yet when night fell and the mansion slipped into sleep, they sought each other out like two souls starving for warmth, Vincent knocking on her door at midnight when the world lay silent, and Isabella opening it to him with a racing heart and flushed cheeks. Words unnecessary because a single look into each other's eyes said everything, their kisses speaking what language never could, sometimes simply lying together in the dark, with Vincent holding her from behind, his warm breath against her neck as they whispered about dreams and about the life they might have had if circumstances were different, other nights kissing as if tomorrow would never come, as if every moment together were the last. Isabella feeling the desperation woven into every one of his touches, at times meeting in the library late at night, when Isabella pretended to look for a book and Vincent pretended to work, ending with stolen kisses behind shelves that rose to the ceiling, hearts pounding with the fear of discovery yet unable to part. Isabella never having felt such happiness in all her 27 years, and never having felt such guilt either, each morning waking with the taste of Vincent's kiss still on her lips, and staring into the mirror, wondering who she was becoming, loving a man already engaged, hiding in the shadows behind Victoria even though she loathed that woman to her core, placing her future into a relationship with no escape, yet then Vincent would look at her with those deep black eyes that seemed to hold an entire universe, and whisper that he had never felt this way with anyone, not even Sophia, and all of Isabella's doubts would dissolve like morning mist under the sun, until one night, as they lay together on the sofa in the library, Vincent said something she never expected, telling her he wanted to break off the engagement with Victoria, and that he would speak to his father and to Don Antonio and find a way. Isabella sitting upright with eyes wide in shock, and telling him he could not do that because Rosa had explained how vital the marriage was to both families and that ending it would mean war. Vincent rising with her and gripping her shoulders with unwavering resolve, saying he knew Don Antonio would see it as humiliation and that blood might be spilled, yet he could not continue living this way, could not marry a woman he did not love while his heart belonged to Isabella, that he would find a way because he had to. Isabella's tears spilling as she clung to him, wanting to believe in his words and in the possibility of a future together, while knowing deep inside that the world was not so fair, that she was only a poor nanny from Naples and he the heir to a mafia empire, with an abyss between them that love alone might not cross. But for this night, in his arms, she allowed herself to dream, unaware that from the shadows at the end of the corridor a pair of eyes had seen everything. Enzo, Vincent's loyal right hand, standing there with a face etched in worry, knowing the secret could not remain hidden for long, not because he would betray it, but because in their world walls had ears, and those who wished to bring Vincent down would never ignore a weakness. The storm was coming, and Enzo could only hope that when it broke, his boss would have the strength to protect the two most important females in his life, his young daughter Lily and the nanny who had stolen his frozen heart. 2 weeks after the night Vincent spoke of wanting to break the engagement, Isabella received a message that made the blood in her veins turn to ice, when a servant came to her room with a tense expression and told her that Don Salvatore Romano wished to see her in the study immediately. Isabella, knowing of Vincent's father, the 68-year-old man who had built the Romano Empire from nothing and who had once been the most feared boss in Miami before handing power to his son, a man she rarely saw in the mansion because he lived elsewhere, and whose presence always cast a heavy shadow over the house. And when Isabella entered the study, she found Don Salvatore seated behind a massive oak desk, silver-white hair slicked back, black eyes as sharp as Vincent's yet utterly devoid of warmth, a gold family ring on his hand, tapping a steady rhythm against the wood as he ordered her to close the door and sit. Isabella obeying on trembling legs, knowing this meeting would bring nothing good. Don Salvatore studying her in silence, as if appraising a cheap object, that silence more terrifying than any threat, before finally stating coldly that he knew about her and his son, and asking whether she thought he lacked eyes and ears in his own house. Isabella feeling her heart drop into her stomach, as words failed her. Don Salvatore, rising and approaching her, until she felt painfully small before his power, as he told her he had investigated Isabella Martinez, an orphaned girl from a poor village near Naples with a brother named Marco, lying bedridden in Italy awaiting surgery, calling it pitiful yet irrelevant to him because there was only one thing that mattered, and that was for her to disappear from his son's life. Isabella lifting her head to meet his icy gaze and saying she did not understand, her voice shaking as she tried to speak of Vincent and herself, only to be cut off sharply as Don Salvatore declared there was no Vincent in her, that his son would marry Victoria Castellano as planned, and that this union was far more important than any foolish romance she had put into his head, mocking her for daring to dream of standing beside the heir to the Romano Empire. Don Salvatore returning to his desk and opening a file before she could protest, laying out information about Marco Martinez, 24 years old, hospitalized at San Giovanni in Naples, awaiting spinal surgery estimated at around $200,000. Isabella's head spinning as she saw photographs of her brother smiling weakly from his hospital bed. Don Salvatore, remarking calmly how unfortunate it would be if something happened to the boy before she gathered enough money, an accident perhaps, or a hospital suddenly refusing treatment for lack of funds, reminding her he had people everywhere, including in Italy. Isabella feeling as if she had been struck in the chest, breath failing and tears spilling as she whispered that he could not do this because Marco was innocent. Don Salvatore replying without a shred of mercy that he could and would if she did not leave, giving her 1 week to disappear from the mansion and from his son's life, and warning that if she told Vincent about this conversation, Marco would suffer an accident the very next day, making it clear he was not joking and trusting she was smart enough to understand. Isabella leaving the study as if walking on air, scarcely remembering how she reached her room before collapsing to the floor in tears, thinking of Vincent and their fragile new love, and his promises to find a way for them to be together. Then thinking of Marco and his hopeful smile during their last video call and his voice saying they were only months away from the surgery, knowing she could not allow anything to happen to her brother or let him pay the price for her selfish love. And that night, when Vincent knocked on her door as he always did, Isabella lied that she was unwell and needed rest, lying in the darkness listening to his footsteps fade away, while her heart shattered into pieces with every passing second. 3 days after the meeting with Don Salvatore, Isabella lived in a private hell of torment and fear, doing everything she could to avoid Vincent by inventing reasons from Lily needing constant care to claiming she felt unwell, and each time she caught the worry and confusion in his deep black eyes. Her heart felt as though it were being torn apart, Vincent sensing that something was wrong and repeatedly trying to speak with her alone only for Isabella to evade him every time, and she could see the hurt slowly replacing concern on his face, wanting desperately to tell him the truth about Don Salvatore's threat, yet falling silent each time. The image of Marco lying in his hospital bed rose in her mind, until on the afternoon of the 4th day, as Isabella played with Lily in the garden, a servant came to say there was a visitor asking to see her in the living room. Isabella surprised and unaware of who it could be, only to step inside and find Victoria Castellano seated on the red velvet sofa with a triumphant smile that made the blood in Isabella's veins turn to ice, Victoria ordering her sweetly to close the door so they could speak privately as women. Isabella complying reluctantly and remaining standing even when Victoria gestured to the chair opposite, Victoria merely smiling wider and producing a brown envelope from her Hermes bag, calling it a small gift, and sliding it across the table, while suggesting Isabella might want to see its contents before they were delivered to her father, Isabella's hands shaking as she opened it and nearly collapsing at what she saw. Dozens of photographs secretly taken through windows and doorways capturing the most intimate moments between her and Vincent. Kissing in the library, Vincent holding her from behind in an empty kitchen, entering her room at midnight, even lying together on the sofa with their clothes disheveled, Victoria gloating that she was not as foolish as Isabella thought, and that she had suspected for some time, and had Isabella followed for weeks, explaining that the photographs were enough to drive her father into a fury and spark an immediate war with the Romano family. Isabella feeling the world crumble as she looked up through tears and asked what Victoria wanted, Victoria answering coldly that she wanted Isabella gone, revealing that while Don Salvatore had given her a week, she herself was less patient and granting Isabella 3 days to leave, or else the photographs would reach her father. Asking if Isabella understood what would follow: war, bloodshed, and Vincent forced to face the full might of the Castellano family. Isabella shaking her head as tears streamed down, trapped between Don Salvatore's threat and Victoria's snare, and knowing that whichever path she chose would end with her losing Vincent. Victoria standing to straighten her flawless dress and expressing satisfaction that they understood each other, adding that this was her final warning and next time she would not speak first. Words Isabella did not fully understand until that evening, when Rosa asked her to buy supplies at a nearby market, and Isabella borrowed the small staff car, stopping at a red light on the way back, when a black, unmarked truck suddenly slammed into the side of her car at terrifying speed, metal shrieking and glass exploding, as her body was violently thrown before everything went dark. Isabella waking on the pavement surrounded by bystanders with blood on her forehead and searing pain in her left arm, the truck gone without a trace, and her car crushed beyond recognition. Taken to the hospital where doctors said she was lucky with only minor injuries, cuts and bruises, and a fractured left arm needing a cast. Nothing life-threatening. Vincent arriving in a frenzy upon hearing the news, and Isabella seeing panic and anguish on his face and knowing she could not hide forever. Yet when he asked what happened, she lied that it was a normal accident caused by a drunk truck driver, unable to tell him the truth or that this was Victoria's warning because she knew he would do something reckless and everything would spiral out of control. And lying in the hospital bed with her arm in a cast and her body aching, Isabella stared out into the Miami night and realized her time had run out, that she could not stay any longer, not out of fear for herself, but for Vincent, for Lily, and above all for Marco, far away in Italy, and that she would have to leave even if it meant her heart would shatter into a million pieces and never truly heal again. 2 days after the accident, Isabella was discharged from the hospital and returned to the Romano mansion with her left arm in a cast and a heart weighed down as if bound by stone, Vincent wanting her to remain under observation for several more days, but Isabella insisting on leaving because she knew she had no time left. Victoria having given her 3 days and now only 1 remained, and she had made her decision, the most painful decision of her 27 years of hardship, that she would leave at dawn the next morning before the sun rose, before Vincent woke, before Lily could see her walk out the door, and on her final night in the Romano mansion, Isabella sat alone in her room, under the weak glow of a bedside lamp, her uninjured hand trembling as it held a pen over a blank sheet of paper, having written and torn up dozens of drafts, unable to find the words to say goodbye to the man who had awakened her frozen heart, unable to explain in a way he would understand, without revealing the threats hanging over them both, until at last she wrote a short letter, each word like a drop of blood seeping from her breaking heart, writing that she was sorry, that she could not stay, that he deserved happiness with someone who belonged to his world more than she ever could, and that she would never forget him no matter where she went, saying nothing of Don Salvatore, nothing of Victoria, nothing of the threats or the accident, because she knew that if Vincent learned the truth, he would do anything to keep her, and that would lead only to disaster for everyone. Folding the letter and placing it on the desk before packing the battered old suitcase she had arrived with 8 months earlier, owning little beyond a few clothes and basic personal items so that packing took only minutes, and when the suitcase stood ready by the door, Isabella knew there was one final thing she had to do before leaving, something she feared even more than facing Don Salvatore or Victoria. She had to say goodbye to Lily, and so she quietly opened her door and stepped into the dark hallway, bare feet moving soundlessly across the cold marble floor. Lily's bedroom only a few steps away, and when Isabella pushed the door open, moonlight spilled across the angelic face of the sleeping child. Lily curled on her bed, clutching her worn stuffed bear. Black curls fanned across the pillow, small lips parted as if dreaming something sweet. Isabella kneeling beside the bed, as tears fell before she realized they had begun, looking at that innocent face and remembering the first time they met. The frightened little girl curled in a corner who would not speak to anyone, now transformed into a joyful child who laughed and talked and called her Mama Bella in the clearest voice in the world. Isabella loving her as her own flesh and blood, and finding the pain of leaving Lily even greater than leaving Vincent, whispering through tears that she was sorry, that Mama Bella had to go, but that Mama Bella loved her more than anything, asking her to be good, to smile often, and to let Papa love her. bending to place a trembling kiss on Lily's forehead as tears fell onto the child's cheek. Lily stirring in her sleep and murmuring Mama Bella without waking, and Isabella forcing herself to stand and leave the room before she completely lost control. Closing the door and leaning against the hallway wall, clutching her chest and crying in silence. Crying for Lily, for Vincent, for a love stolen by fate, and for herself, a 27-year-old woman who had dared to dream of happiness and was now paying the price with her entire heart. And when the tears finally ran dry and dawn began to glow faintly on the horizon, Isabella returned to her room, took her suitcase, and descended the stairs for the last time without looking back, because she knew that if she did, she would never be able to walk away at all. Isabella was standing in the grand foyer with her suitcase in hand, ready to step out of the mansion's doors for the last time, when a strange intuition made her stop short, something feeling wrong in the stillness of dawn, an eerie silence instead of peace, her heart tightening as Lily's face flashed in her mind. And though she knew she should not turn back, her legs carried her up the stairs toward the child's room, pushing open the pale pink door, and freezing at the sight of the empty bed, blankets tangled as if someone had left in a hurry, Lily's old stuffed bear lying abandoned on the floor like a silent cry for help. Isabella calling Lily's name with a trembling voice, and searching the room, the bathroom, the closet, finding nothing, then rushing into the hallway and screaming Lily's name as her voice echoed through the mansion like the cry of a wounded animal, Rosa running in from the kitchen in panic, and Vincent appearing from his bedroom, sleep still in his eyes until terror sharpened his focus at the sound of Isabella's voice. Isabella shouting that Lily was not in her room and she could not find her anywhere. Vincent's face draining of color as he stormed into his daughter's room, saw the empty bed, and barked orders for the guards to search the entire estate immediately. And amid the chaos, Isabella's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number, her blood turning to ice as she read the brief words telling her that if she wanted the child alive, she was to go to warehouse number 7 at the port of Miami within 1 hour, alone, without telling anyone, followed by a photograph of Lily tied to a wooden chair with tear-swollen eyes, and Victoria Castellano standing behind her with a deranged smile. Isabella's knees buckling as she braced herself against the wall, realizing Victoria had kidnapped Lily and crossed every boundary to eliminate her, placing the innocent child she loved like her own in mortal danger, knowing she could not tell Vincent because he would arrive with an army, and in desperation Victoria could do anything to Lily, understanding she had to go alone and save the child at any cost, wiping her tears and forcing herself to calm as she told Vincent she would search the garden again, then slipping out the back door and taking a taxi to the port, praying through the entire drive for Lily's safety, for the courage to face Victoria, and for a miracle she knew would never come, arriving at warehouse number 7 tucked into a desolate corner of the port of Miami, a rusted old building with sealed iron doors and the sharp smell of salt in the air, Isabella stepping inside with her heart pounding and seeing Victoria standing in the center with Lily bound to a chair behind her and 2 large guards flanking them. Lily screaming Mama Bella in terror and begging to be saved. Isabella rushing forward only to be stopped by Victoria's raised hand and cold voice telling her not yet because they had business to settle first. Victoria throwing a stack of documents onto the filthy floor and ordering Isabella to sign them, explaining they were in agreement that Isabella would leave Miami that very day and never contact Vincent or Lily again, renouncing any claim and any intention of returning to the Romano family. Isabella picking up the papers with shaking hands and skimming the brutal terms, knowing that signing would mean losing Vincent and Lily forever. But when she looked up and met Lily's frightened, hopeful eyes, she understood she had no choice, dropping to her knees on the grimy warehouse floor, taking the pen Victoria offered, and signing her name on every page, as though she were signing the death sentence of her own heart. Isabella's final signature appeared on the last page. Victoria Castellano burst into laughter, a sharp, chilling sound echoing through the abandoned warehouse like a demon reveling in victory, saying coldly, as she snatched the papers from Isabella's hands, and checked each signature that Isabella was more obedient than she had expected, but Isabella paid no attention to the mockery, and looked only at Lily sobbing on the chair, small hands tightly bound with coarse rope, telling Victoria in a hoarse voice thick with restrained tears that she had signed, and now Victoria must release the child because she had promised Lily would be safe. Victoria lifting her head to regard her with contempt and cruel amusement, tilting her head as if pretending to think, and replying that she had never promised to release the child at all, only that Isabella had to come if she wanted Lily to live, adding with a sneer that buying the night guard's loyalty was cheaper than a pair of her shoes, allowing her to walk right into the lion's den without a sound, rage boiling through Isabella, as she lunged toward Victoria, only to be stopped by the two guards who seized her arms and held her fast despite her struggle. Isabella screaming that Victoria was insane, and that Lily was only a 5-year-old child who had done nothing to deserve this. Victoria stepping closer with steel blue eyes glittering with a madness Isabella had never seen before, calmly saying that Lily's crime was being born the daughter of Vincent Romano, and daring to call Isabella her mother, when that place should have belonged to Victoria, and that Isabella's crime was daring to steal her man. Isabella spitting in Victoria's face in the instinctive reaction of a cornered animal, Victoria recoiling as her perfect face twisted with fury, before slapping Isabella with brutal force, nearly sending her to the floor, if not for the guards restraining her. Victoria wiping her face with a silk scarf, and coldly revealing that the car accident had been ordered by her and meant to kill Isabella outright by striking the driver's side, but the driver had hit the wrong angle and left her only lightly injured, adding that he had already been dealt with for his stupidity. Isabella feeling her blood turn to ice at the merciless confession, and realizing she was facing a true monster without limits, asking weakly and desperately what Victoria wanted now since she had signed and would leave as demanded. Victoria smiling like a serpent savoring its prey, and saying she wanted to ensure Isabella truly disappeared, not merely leaving Miami but vanishing forever so Vincent could never find her, even if he turned the world upside down. Signaling to the guards who began tying Isabella's hands behind her back with the same coarse rope used on Lily, Isabella offering no resistance, and meeting Victoria's gaze without fear, as she said with eerie calm that Vincent would discover the truth. And when he did, Victoria would pay for everything. Victoria laughing confidently and replying that Vincent would discover nothing, because when Lily was found safe somewhere, there would be a message claiming Isabella had kidnapped her and fled abroad, complete with fabricated evidence showing Isabella had taken money from a rival family to steal Vincent's daughter, declaring that Vincent would hate Isabella for the rest of his life while Victoria would stand beside him as the only woman he could trust. Isabella feeling sick at the cruelty and deceit, and turning her gaze to Lily sobbing as she whispered silent apologies, knowing she had failed to protect the child and failed to protect her love and was about to be turned into a traitor in Vincent's eyes. Victoria ordering one guard to take Lily back to the mansion and leave her at the back gate unseen, then turning to Isabella and instructing the other to put her in the car and take her to a prepared location, saying she would decide Isabella's fate after everything settled. Lily screaming Mama Bella as the rope was cut and she was lifted away, begging not to go and to stay with Mama Bella, Isabella forcing a trembling smile through streaming tears, and telling Lily to go back to Papa and that she would be all right, and that Mama Bella loved her more than anything. Lily crying out Isabella's name until the guard carried her out of the warehouse and the sound faded into the foggy morning. Isabella closing her eyes and letting the tears fall freely, knowing that at least Lily was safe and would return to Vincent, and that even if she died in this warehouse, it would be a price worth paying for the peace of those she loved. When Lily was found sobbing uncontrollably at the back gate of the Romano mansion, Vincent knew at once that something unspeakably terrible had happened, the child throwing herself into his arms and recounting everything through broken sobs, the terrifying blonde woman, the dark warehouse, Mama Bella signing papers to save her and now being held there, Vincent's face shifting from worry to horror, and then to a fury no one around him had witnessed in the 3 years since Sophia was murdered, as he handed Lily to Rosa and summoned Enzo to his study immediately, his black eyes burning like live coals, ordering Enzo to find where Victoria was holding Isabella using every resource they had and caring nothing for the cost. Enzo nodding and disappearing without a word, knowing this was no time for questions, while Vincent activated his intelligence network and the truth emerged piece by piece. Isabella's car accident revealed as an attempted murder ordered by Victoria, the surveillance photographs traced back to her operatives, even Don Salvatore's threats, exposed as having been manipulated by her hand, each revelation cutting into Vincent like a blade, the realization crushing him that he had failed to protect Isabella and left her to face such danger alone. Less than 2 hours later, Enzo returning with confirmation that Isabella was being held in a warehouse in the southern industrial zone of the port, with roughly 10 guards and plans already in motion to move her out of the country by sea. That night, Vincent rising and retrieving the Beretta he had not touched in many years, stating coldly that before they went there he needed to see Don Antonio, arriving at the Castellano estate in broad daylight and entering as though he owned the place despite dozens of guns trained on him, confronting Don Antonio in the living room and throwing down a dossier of evidence detailing Victoria's crimes, declaring that Don Antonio's daughter had kidnapped his child, tried to kill the woman he loved, and was now holding her hostage, Don Antonio's composure faltering as he reviewed the proof, yet insisting Victoria was his daughter and could not be treated as an enemy. Vincent replying with glacial certainty that the engagement between their families was over, and that if Don Antonio protected Victoria he would become an enemy of the Romano family. Don Antonio erupting in anger and questioning whether Romano could stand alone against Castellano. Vincent meeting his gaze without flinching, and stating that this was not a threat but a declaration of war, giving Don Antonio 1 hour to choose between surrendering Victoria and preserving peace, or protecting her and watching everything he had built burn to ash, then turning and leaving, ordering Enzo to mobilize all their men and prepare to storm the warehouse within 2 hours regardless of Don Antonio's decision, swearing that he would bring Isabella home, and that anyone who stood between him and her would die. Vincent's convoy tore through the streets of Miami like a black storm, 12 SUVs carrying the most loyal men of the Romano family racing toward the warehouse where Isabella was being held. Vincent seated in the back with a beretta in his hand, dark eyes burning with a fire no one around him had ever seen. The fire of a man ready to burn the world to the ground to save the woman he loved, and when they arrived, the warehouse stood silent in the fading afternoon light. Though Vincent knew at least 10 gunmen were inside, he signaled Enzo and the team to fan out and encircle the building, then personally led the main assault as they smashed through the doors, gunfire erupting like thunder, bullets ripping through the air and slamming into brick walls, Victoria's guards falling one by one under the precise fire of the Romano men. Vincent advancing like an avenging angel, his hands steady as he dropped every enemy between him and Isabella. But when he kicked open the final door to the room where she had been held, he found only an empty chair and severed ropes on the floor, Enzo rushing in with a grim expression to report that Isabella had been moved, and that according to his sources, Victoria was taking her to a private airstrip on the outskirts, where a plane was waiting to leave the country. Vincent's heart clenching as he sprinted back to the vehicles, and ordered an immediate change of course, praying in silence as they raced against time, something he had not done since the day Sophia died, praying Isabella would be alive, and that he would reach her before it was too late. Arriving to see Victoria's white Maserati parked on the runway as she dragged Isabella from the car, a small gun pressed to the head of the woman he loved, Isabella battered and exhausted with bruises on her face and torn clothing, yet her brown eyes lighting up at the sight of Vincent stepping forward armed with his men behind him, Victoria screaming for him to stop and threatening to shoot, Vincent halting 10 paces away, his gaze never leaving Isabella, as he ordered Victoria to release her and keep this between the two of them. Victoria laughing hysterically with wild platinum hair and steel blue eyes blazing, shrieking that Vincent belonged to her, and that this cheap servant had stolen him, tightening her grip and pressing the gun harder as Vincent tried to advance, screaming that if she could not have him, no one would, Isabella meeting Vincent's eyes through tears, and telling him not to worry about her but to take care of Lily, because that was what mattered most. Vincent breaking as he told her he could not lose her, that he loved her, and wanted her beside him for life, Victoria's face twisting with jealousy and hatred as she screamed that if he loved Isabella so much he should watch her die, the moment exploding as Victoria began to pull the trigger, and a single shot rang out from the right, Victoria collapsing to the ground as her weapon flew from her hand. Enzo standing there with smoking gun and cold resolve, declaring that no one threatened the boss's family, Vincent ignoring the wounded Victoria and running to Isabella, crushing her into his arms as if afraid she would vanish. Isabella sobbing against him in exhaustion and relief. Vincent whispering apologies and love, and asking her to be his wife. Isabella lifting her tear-swollen eyes to ask about his family and obligations. Vincent telling her she was his family, that she and Lily were all he needed and everything else was just business. Isabella whispering yes through tears and accepting him. Vincent kissing her on the runway beneath the blazing Miami sunset, sirens wailing in the distance, and men securing the scene around them. And in that moment, amid blood and chaos, at the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a new life, Isabella Martinez finally understood what it meant to be truly loved. 3 years after those harrowing events, the Romano estate was no longer a cold place steeped in secrets, but had become a true home filled with laughter and happiness. The Miami morning sun filtering through the olive trees Isabella had planted in the garden to honor her distant Italian homeland, while children's laughter rang across the lush green lawn. Lily, now 8 years old, no longer the timid child curled in a corner, but a lively and loving young girl running after her 2-year-old brother Matteo between the trees, Matteo bearing his father's deep dark eyes and his mother's warm smile, the living embodiment of the fierce love between Vincent and Isabella, and the clearest proof that happiness can bloom even from the most painful circumstances. Isabella standing by the living room window with one hand resting on her rounded belly, carrying their third child, and smiling as she watched her children play, 3 years passing like a dream, and at times still unbelievable in how profoundly her life had changed. Victoria arrested after the airport incident, and facing charges from kidnapping to attempted murder, now serving time in federal prison, and never again able to threaten Isabella's family. Don Antonio Castellano, losing his power as allied families turned away in disgrace over his daughter's crimes, and the Castellano family reduced to a shadow of its former self. Don Salvatore initially opposing his son's marriage to a poor nanny, yet slowly softening when he saw Vincent's happiness and Lily's joy, and when he first held his grandson Matteo, now visiting often to play with the children and sharing with Isabella a warmth no one had expected. Isabella's greatest joy being Marco, her brother, who had undergone successful surgery 2 years earlier, and now lived healthily in Miami. Vincent paying every cent of the surgery and rehabilitation without hesitation, and Isabella crying like a child in her husband's arms when Marco stood and walked for the first time after years confined to a bed. Marco now working at the legitimate transport company Vincent founded, as part of transforming the Romano family business toward transparency, and planning to propose to his beautiful American girlfriend later this year. Familiar strong arms wrapping around Isabella's waist from behind, as she leaned back into her husband's chest, while Vincent kissed her hair, asking softly what she was thinking. Isabella smiling as she watched Lily and Matteo in the garden, and answering that she was thinking of 3 years ago, and the girl with the torn suitcase who came to this mansion without knowing her life would change forever. Vincent, holding her tighter and asking, with a hint of worry only she could hear, whether she ever regretted loving a man like him and entering such a dangerous world. Isabella turning to face him, and lifting his face in her hands to look into the dark eyes she loved more than her own life, and saying she regretted only one thing, and smiling gently when she saw his concern, that they had taken too long to find each other. Vincent smiling the smile only she and the children ever saw, and kissing her tenderly as he whispered in Italian that he loved her, and she answered that she loved him too. Lily running up calling Papa and Mama with Matteo toddling behind, saying they were hungry. Vincent lifting Matteo while Isabella took Lily's hand, and the family walking together into the kitchen, where Rosa prepared lunch with a joyful smile on her lined face. Isabella looking at her family gathered around the table and remembering the young woman who arrived in Miami with a torn suitcase and a wounded heart, having sought only a chance to save her brother, yet being given far more, a love worth fighting for, a family worth protecting, and a future filled with endless possibility. The story of Isabella and Vincent teaching us that true love can take root in the most unexpected places, that happiness often follows the harshest trials, and that when you find someone worthy, you must be brave enough to fight for them even if the whole world turns its back. Life not always easy, and at times lonely and desperate, as Isabella once felt sleeping on the streets of Miami, yet dawn always coming after the darkest night, and those worthy of your love appearing when you least expect it. The story ending here with thanks for walking with us through this emotional journey. And if Isabella and Vincent's story has touched your heart, please like and subscribe so you do not miss other love stories we bring to you each day. Share this video with those you love to spread the values of love and family. Leave your heartfelt thoughts in the comments below, and tell us whether this story reminded you of someone in your own life, so we may connect and share together. Wishing all of you watching good health, joyful lives, and peaceful days beside those you love. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.